In the final days of a war that consumed the world, millions vanished into the fog of surrender, retreat, or silence. But some disappearances were deliberate, erased by design, hidden beneath false manifests and sealed orders stamped Nur für den Führer. Decades later, fragments of truth began to surface. A convoy that never reached its port, a fortress that existed only on paper, a factory that left radiation where it should have left rubble. Each fragment led investigators deeper into the Shadow War, a conflict fought not on battlefields, but in archives, sealed rooms, and coded files. And what they found beneath those layers of denial and secrecy would challenge everything known about how the Second World War truly ended. Chapter 1: Operation Eclipse, the Vanished Convoy of 1945. On the night of April 29, 1945, the Baltic Sea lay under an unnatural calm. To the west, the city of Kiel burned, its shipyards reduced to molten metal and ash under RAF bombardment. Yet from the smoke-choked harbour, a small convoy of Kriegsmarine vessels slipped silently into the fog. Naval logs later reconstructed from British intercepts list one Type WWII submarine, U-977, 2 torpedo escorts of the Elbing class, and a disguised cargo freighter bearing the name Trondheim. Together, they sailed under the codename Eclipse Column. Their stated purpose was evacuation, the extraction of wounded personnel and civilians bound for neutral Sweden, but no survivors, wreckage, or transmissions were ever found. The first reference to Operation Eclipse appeared not in German archives, but within a misfiled British Admiralty cable dated May 2, 1945. The cable was marked Ultra Priority for Eyes of Sea. It referenced an intercepted Enigma transmission between Admiral Karl Dönitz's Flensburg command and an unidentified Baltic command post. The message contained a single, chilling phrase: Eclipse proceeds. Cargo secured. Destination: Morgenlicht. The term Morgenlicht, German for morning light, does not correspond to any known port, operation, or military designation. Intelligence analysts believed it to be a codename. What cargo the message referred to remains a mystery. After Germany's formal surrender on May 8th, Allied forces initiated Operation Archive Sweep, a comprehensive hunt for any remaining U-boat activity. British destroyer HMS Marston was among the vessels assigned to patrol the Skagerrak Strait. The ship's last log entry, recovered from naval archives in Portsmouth, records a sonar contact at coordinates 58°22N, 10°42E, a region of cold, deep water between Denmark and Norway. The log notes multiple metallic signatures below 90 fathoms, possibly scuttled craft. Hours later, HMS Marston transmitted a routine status update to Naval Command. It was never heard from again. No distress signal, no wreckage, no crew were ever recovered. In 1952, a declassified US Navy report titled Baltic Anomalies, Section D, surfaced within the archives of the Office of Naval Research. The document, marked Copy Number 3 of 5, included sonar tracings taken by a Swedish survey expedition. Among the findings were the outlines of 3 separate hulls lying in parallel on the seabed, each approximately 150 meters apart. One bore the unmistakable silhouette of a Type WWII submarine. Nearby lay a cargo vessel with open holds, empty except for 2 cylindrical containers, one ruptured. Residue samples taken during later dives indicated traces of uranium oxide mixed with seawater, consistent with materials used in early nuclear refinement. The presence of uranium, if genuine, raised impossible questions. By April 1945, Germany's atomic program, under Heisenberg's Uranverein, had been fractured, its laboratories scattered across the Reich. Officially, only small quantities of refined uranium existed, stored at Haigerloch and Oranienburg. Yet an intercepted Sicherheitsdienst memo dated April 25th referenced the transfer of cultural scientific assets to Sweden via maritime route. The memo bore a cipher signature matching that of SS Sturmbannführer Wilhelm Sievers, director of the Ahnenerbe Society. The organization, notorious for its pseudo-scientific and occult research, often operated under the guise of cultural preservation. If Sievers was involved in Eclipse, the assets may not have been cargo at all. But People declassified OSS interrogation transcripts from 1946 lend further weight to this theory. In one, a captured Kriegsmarine radio operator, identified only as Hauptbootsmann KL, stated under questioning that Eclipse carried passengers of high scientific clearance, including 2 civilians in SS uniforms with silver-rimmed epaulets, and a woman who spoke fluent English. The prisoner insisted that their destination was not Sweden, but north of there, somewhere no map shows. His testimony was dismissed as incoherent at the time. By the late 1960s, Cold War politics buried the matter further. Sweden's neutrality during the war became a diplomatic shield. Neither NATO nor the Warsaw Pact wanted to provoke exposure of possible illegal wartime transfers through Scandinavian territory. The British Ministry of Defence sealed most Eclipse files under the 70-year rule, classifying them as potential national security liabilities. Researchers attempting to access them were met with polite refusals or silence. When a BBC investigative team in 1973 proposed a documentary titled The Convoy That Vanished, the project was abruptly withdrawn after advice from higher authorities. One of the few individuals to persist was naval historian Dr. Helena Draycott. In 1981, she obtained permission to review unclassified fragments of Operation Archive Sweep under the Freedom of Information Act. Among thousands of routine patrol reports, she discovered a carbon copy of an internal memorandum marked for Admiralty intelligence only. It referenced compartmentalized cargo of high scientific priority to be recovered in event of scuttling, primary importance to Combined Allied Research Authority. The memo was signed not by a naval officer, but by a civilian scientist from the British mission to the US Manhattan Project, Dr. James Chadwick. This discovery connected Eclipse to something far larger than a lost convoy. If uranium oxide was aboard, and if Chadwick's office had been aware of the shipment, it suggests the Allies were tracking, perhaps even facilitating, the transfer of German nuclear materials. It would explain the extraordinary secrecy that followed, and why the wrecks, when later located by private expeditions, were cordoned off under the guise of environmental protection zones. In 1997, a Swedish deep-sea recovery company, Baltic Trench Lettered, conducted a sonar mapping project near the Skagerrak. Their data revealed 3 primary wrecks matching Eclipse columns' last known positions. The company's director, Anders Nyström, reported strong magnetic anomalies surrounding one site, as if metallic debris had been dispersed intentionally. Within months, the Swedish government declared the area a restricted environmental preserve due to potential contamination. Nyström's vessel, the Havsfolken, mysteriously sank 2 years later under unexplained circumstances while attempting an unauthorized dive. All hands were lost. Today, no official acknowledgement of Operation Eclipse exists in any public archive. The Kriegsmarine's final war diary omits it entirely, as if the operation was erased retroactively. Yet scattered references in Soviet naval records, British intercept summaries, and US intelligence correspondence hint at a coordinated effort among both Axis and Allied powers to conceal the truth. Whether the convoy was transporting technology, personnel, or something more intangible, a weapon, a theory, or a person, remains unknown. Beneath the black water of the Baltic, the remains of Eclipse column still rest undisturbed, sealed by depth and silence. The cargo, whatever it was, never reached its destination, and those who sought to recover it, from the HMS Marston to Anders Nyström's expedition, shared the same fate: disappearance without trace. Each vanished record, each missing name, each sealed folder seems less like accident and more like design, as though someone, somewhere, wanted the sea to keep its secrets. Chapter 2: The Silent Directive of Camp Königstein. In the mist-shrouded hills of Saxony, east of Dresden and near the Elbe River's bend, there lies the fortress of Königstein, a medieval citadel that for centuries guarded the heart of Central Europe. During the last years of the Third Reich, it was reoccupied under the authority of the Oberkommando des Heeres and renamed Sonderlager 12 für Königstein. Official documents listed it as a secure communications relay under the Wehrmacht's Nachrichtenabteilung, Signals Division, but the fortress was never wired for ordinary transmission. Inside its cellars and undervaulted corridors, a different kind of experiment was conducted, one that never appeared in post-war inventories and whose paper trail exists only in fragments of scorched reports and unacknowledged transfers. The first concrete trace of Camp Königstein emerged from a captured cache of SS documents seized near Pirna in May 1945. Among them was a memorandum dated March 3, 1944, bearing the letterhead of the Ahnenerbe Forschungs- und Lehrgemeinschaft. The document referred cryptically to acoustic influence experiments on controlled populations and authorized transfer of technical specialists from the Reich Institute for Psychoacoustics and Speech Research. At the bottom, the signature of SS Sturmbannführer Emil Thilo, a name absent from every known personnel file. His authorization code, however, matched that of other black projects within Himmler's science network. The attached requisition list included oscillatory amplifiers, low-frequency emitters, and subject retention chambers. What the Ahnenerbe had labeled as acoustic influence was, according to later Allied intelligence interpretation, a covert program in psychological warfare, a study of how sound frequencies, repetitive tones, and subliminal modulation could break human resistance without violence. Königstein's geographical isolation made it ideal. Surrounded by stone cliffs, its subterranean galleries could absorb or conceal any sound. Locals who worked as laborers recalled hearing a continuous hum at night that caused nausea and vertigo. They were told it came from new radio equipment designed to interfere with enemy broadcasts. When the US Army's 3rd Infantry Division reached the fortress in May 1945, they found the site abandoned. No officers, no technicians, no prisoners. The main laboratory, built within the lower casemate beneath the West Bastion, had been stripped bare. Power lines were cut, the generator dismantled, and walls scorched as if subjected to an electrical discharge. Lieutenant Arthur H. Lansing, who led the inspection team, recorded in his field diary that the rooms reeked of ozone and chemical solvents, and that insulation residue covered the floor like frost. A stack of damaged reels lay nearby, labelled simply Ton BK. These were handed over to the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and vanished into the Washington archives. Lansing's report was filed under PSYOP's Königstein facility. Preliminary notes. It was never declassified. The fate of the Königstein personnel remained unknown until 1951, when the newly formed CIA began its recruitment of ex-German intelligence specialists through Operation Paperclip. In a confidential memorandum dated June 12, 1951, an internal review referenced Project Echo, a behavioral analysis initiative staffed by former Reich scientific assets, primarily in psychoacoustic research. Though locations were redacted, one of the lead consultants was identified as Dr. E.T., the same initials found on Königstein's requisition documents. Cross-reference with paperclip transport. Manifests from Bremerhaven confirms that one Dr. Emil Thilo entered the United States under the alias Erich Thaler, employed by the Air Force's Cambridge Research Center in Massachusetts. In 1953, the CIA launched MK Naomi, and later MK Ultra, experimental programs testing human cognition under chemical and sensory stress. Within an annexed briefing to the Senate Intelligence Subcommittee dated 1977, a footnote mentions early psychoacoustic data sourced from German wartime studies, Project Echo, Königstein, regarding cortical resonance thresholds. The phrase Königstein was subsequently blacked out with heavy ink in the released copy. It is one of the few documented links connecting Nazi research on coercive sound manipulation to post-war American psychological operations. The most unsettling evidence, however, did not surface until 1989, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. A cache of Ministerium für Staatssicherheit. Stasi archives uncovered in Dresden contained a reel-to-reel tape, catalogued under Acoustic Archive 47-22. The label read, Königstein, Subject Aufzeichnung. When restored by sound engineers, the tape revealed 43 minutes of tonal patterns, low, pulsating frequencies punctuated by bursts of rhythmic modulation. At irregular intervals, a faint voice can be heard murmuring German words of command: Ruhe, Schlaf, Gehorchen, silence, sleep, obey. Experts at the Technical University of Berlin later confirmed that prolonged exposure to those frequencies could induce severe disorientation, nausea, and dissociation, phenomena consistent with sensory destabilization. An accompanying folder within the Stasi file included a short, typewritten note dated July 1962, Sample. Received via Liaison Orion from US source for use in domestic conditioning. Research. This suggested a bilateral exchange of materials between American intelligence and the East German secret police at the height of the Cold War, using relics of the very same experiments born under the Third Reich. No public inquiry has ever confirmed such cooperation, yet the provenance of the tape is beyond dispute. It carried the same serial notations used in American archival systems during the early 1950s. By the late 1990s, journalists attempting to trace Camp Königstein's remnants found the fortress restored as a tourist site. Guides denied any wartime installations beneath the main structure, claiming that Allied shelling had destroyed all sublevels. Yet satellite ground-penetrating radar surveys commissioned by independent researchers in 2003 indicated a series of unregistered cavities extending westward beneath the hill. Local authorities refused excavation permits, citing geological instability and historical preservation law. To this day, the lower tunnels remain sealed by thick iron gates welded shut after the war are visible, but impenetrable. What took place inside those stone corridors remains conjecture. Some accounts from surviving forced laborers described small cells equipped with steel loudspeakers and medical equipment. One Polish prisoner, interviewed in 1950 by the Red Cross, stated that the sound never stopped, a heartbeat that was not a heartbeat. Others spoke of experiments meant to remove fear through continuous vibration. Yet none of these testimonies were admitted as evidence during post-war trials. Most were deemed unreliable or unverified, their records quietly archived under unsubstantiated claims. The deeper implication of Königstein is that its research did not end with Germany's defeat. It was transplanted, sanitized, repurposed and funded under new governments. The same blueprints that once bore the eagle of the Third Reich now sat in filing cabinets marked with the seals of Western intelligence agencies. A 1965 debriefing from the US Army's Psychological Operations Division explicitly references behavioral modulation frequencies originally developed under German Signal Group K. That is the final known reference to Königstein in any surviving document. If Camp Königstein truly existed as a psychological warfare laboratory, it may represent one of the earliest instances of weaponized neuroscience. It was not about bombs or bullets, but control. The ability to command obedience without words, to reduce human will through engineered silence. Today, the fortress stands serene above the Elbe, its walls washed clean by decades of rain and tourist restoration. Beneath, sealed corridors breathe out faint drafts of air that smell of metal and age. Visitors sometimes report a low, almost inaudible hum when the wind is still, a frequency that vibrates in the chest but not the ears. The official explanation blames acoustics, the resonance of the cliffs. But those who have studied the files know better. The hum, they say, is the last echo of Königstein itself, still transmitting after all these years, whispering commands to no one. Chapter 3. The Ghost Factory of Peenemünde. When Allied forces overran the German rocket development complex at Peenemünde in May 1945, the site appeared to be a monument to destruction. V-2 launch pads lay shattered, laboratories stripped, archives burned. To official inspection teams, it was merely the exhausted husk of the Nazi missile program. But scattered among those ruins were traces of something that did not fit the record. Sealed tunnels that were never mentioned in the Reich's construction plans. Power cables that led nowhere, and a series of concrete access doors built into the coastal dunes, their metal hinges fused by heat. Beneath those dunes, rumors whispered of WWII, a facility so secret that not even the SS Guard detachment stationed at Peenemünde had full clearance. The first hint of WWII surfaced in a British Army technical report dated July 1945, Peenemünde, Annex D, Unregistered Subterranean Installations. Major Ernest Collier, a Royal Engineers officer, noted that the presence of reinforced shafts approximately 200 meters east of Test Stand 7 appears to indicate an underground chamber of significant volume. His team attempted entry, but was repelled by flooding and unexploded ordnance. The report concluded that the tunnels were possibly connected to storage or experimental use. However, an attached appendix, later marked Top Secret, removed to London, 1946, made a single cryptic note: strong magnetic interference. Instruments failed at depth 40 meters. Audible vibration noted. No explanation followed. Throughout 1946 and 1947, Both American and Soviet recovery missions competed to seize what remained of the German rocket program. The Americans captured Wernher von Braun and the bulk of his engineering team. The Soviets, controlling the Eastern Baltic, seized the physical infrastructure of Peenemünde. According to the Soviet 10th Guards Engineer Battalion's field log, dated October 18, 1946, several officers descended into a sealed lower bunker near the southern perimeter. The entry ends abruptly after the line. Discovered partially collapsed chamber with metallic lining. Document fragments recovered. Designation: Project Valhalla. None of those fragments have survived. In 1950, a debriefing report from the CIA's Technical Intelligence Division referenced a Soviet defector named Viktor Kurasov, formerly attached to the Ni-88 Institute in Kaliningrad. Kurasov claimed that the Soviets had uncovered an experimental propulsion system utilizing magnetic containment rather than chemical reaction, allegedly inspired by abandoned German prototypes. The defector described how radiation indicators spiked to lethal levels during excavation, leading to the chamber's immediate reseal under order of Marshal Zhukov. When questioned about the project's name, Kurasov reportedly smiled and said only, "They called it Valhalla, the place where gods burn." For decades, these accounts were dismissed as Cold War exaggeration. Yet in 1969, a US Navy hydrographic survey near the Peenemünde coastline detected persistent subsurface heat signatures inconsistent with natural geothermal sources. Classified Navy memo INT 69124 stated that thermal anomalies correspond with WWII-era reinforced structures of unknown purpose. The area was subsequently declared off-limits to the public, officially due to unexploded ordnance risk. In truth, the anomaly persisted for decades, even as the Baltic sands shifted and the sea reclaimed the coastline. In the mid-1970s, West German journalist Otto Mertens began investigating what he called the Third Peenemünde. Using construction blueprints obtained from surviving Reich Ministry of Armaments archives, he discovered discrepancies between recorded excavation costs and the number of official test facilities. Between 1943 and 1944, nearly 2 million Reichsmarks were allocated to structural reinforcement, Werk Zeta, yet no such site existed on any map. Mertens' research led him to an engineer named Friedrich Lenz, a former Organisation Todi contractor who supervised the Peenemünde diggings. In a taped interview from 1975, Lenz stated, "It was not a rocket factory. They told us it was a magnetic energy experiment. We built chambers without windows. No one was allowed to stay long. The air made your teeth ache." Within weeks of giving that statement, Lenz died in a house fire ruled accidental. The tapes were confiscated by police and never returned. In 1984, Polish divers conducting survey work along the Peenemünde Inlet discovered a series of corroded metal pipes emerging from the seabed. Conduits that extended inland for nearly a kilometre. Chemical analysis of residue inside the pipes revealed traces of liquid sodium and beryllium compounds, substances not used in conventional propulsion testing of the era. These were materials consistent with experimental heat transfer systems or containment vessels designed for extremely high-energy reactions. Whatever the Germans were attempting beneath Werk Zeta, it was far beyond the capacity of wartime rocketry. During German reunification in 1990, the East German Ministry for Heavy Industry declassified a limited set of files pertaining to abandoned military sites in Peenemünde sector. One report, authored by Dr. Ingo Hartmann of the Energieversorgungsamt Stralsund, mentioned a still-active electromagnetic field detected at a depth of 60 meters under the dunes. Hartmann concluded, presence of residual current inexplicable by geological conditions. Recommend continued monitoring. Possible residual effect of pre-war installations. Days after submitting his report, Hartmann's laboratory was burglarized and the field notes disappeared. His body was found 2 months later in what authorities described as a suicide. By the early 2000s, the legend of Werk Zeta had passed into fringe conspiracy circles, often portrayed as evidence of Nazi anti-gravity technology, but careful review of historical data paints a different, more plausible, and darker picture. In 2008, German historian Klaus Reiter uncovered in the Bundesarchiv a shipping manifest dated February 17, 1945. It listed U-boat transfer, Baltic Sector uranium metal 260 kilo classified cargo consigned by Peenemünde WWII and destined for Kiel Naval Command. The entry corroborated the earlier Eclipse column theory that Peenemünde had been the source of advanced nuclear materials, not just missiles. The uranium oxide residues discovered decades later off the Skagerrak Strait aligned almost exactly with that shipment's manifest weight. It implied continuity. The cargo of Eclipse may have originated from WWII. Satellite imagery released inadvertently through a European Space Agency dataset in 2015 reignited the mystery. Thermal scans showed faint rectangular heat zones beneath the coastal dunes, measuring approximately 120 meters by 60 meters. Although attributed publicly to buried concrete ruins absorbing solar radiation, independent physicist Dr. Anna Keller noted that the temperature differential persisted even during winter, a constant 3 degrees above surrounding terrain. Concrete doesn't stay warm in Baltic frost, she remarked in an interview. Something under there is still generating heat. Efforts to excavate the area have been consistently denied. The German Federal Ministry of the Environment, which controls the land, cites the danger of unexploded ordnance and toxic residue. Yet leaked internal correspondence obtained by journalists in 2019 revealed another reason. Radiation. Soil samples collected near the perimeter contained isotopic traces of cobalt-60 and cesium-137, both byproducts of nuclear decay, neither naturally occurring in that area. The official response was swift. Classification orders were reinstated under national security statutes, and the excavation teams were dismissed. The Peenemünde Museum's public exhibits tell a cleaner story. The rockets, the engineers, the dawn of the space age. But buried beneath that narrative is an older, unresolved chapter. If WWII existed, and mounting evidence suggests it did, it was not merely a laboratory but a crucible for something unfinished, a weapon perhaps, or an experiment that outlived its makers. Today, the Baltic wind scours the ruins, covering all traces with sand. The locals speak of the ghost factory, a place where compasses spin and radiostatic fills the air. Fishermen who anchor too close to the coast claim their depth gauges flicker and their engines stall. Officially, these are coincidences, the lingering artifacts of war. Yet the magnetic pull remains, silent and invisible, as if the earth itself remembers the hum that once emanated from beneath its surface. Somewhere under that quiet shore, WWII still sleeps. A sealed chamber of heat and metal, the ghost heart of Peenemünde, beating beneath the sand. Chapter 4. The Red Archive of Operation Scythe. The train left Krakow at dawn on February 14, 1947. It was an unmarked military transport, 8 cars long, moving west toward Lvov under escort by soldiers of the Soviet NKVD's 9th Directorate. The manifest listed it as carrying classified intelligence materials and cultural artifacts recovered from Berlin Sector 4. In reality, it bore a consignment of sealed wooden crates bearing an ominous red sigil. A scythe crossed over a 5-pointed star. The convoy's official designation was Operacja Kosa, Operation Scythe. Its destination, according to a now fragmentary memorandum found decades later in Moscow's Central State Repository, was the internal archive of the NKVD's Department for Foreign Intelligence, intended for long-term storage. The train never arrived. Somewhere between the towns of Przemysl and Lvov, the train derailed on a snow-swept embankment. Soviet reports blamed damaged tracks and sabotage by Polish insurgents. The accident was covered quickly. The line was cleared, the debris removed within 48 hours. Yet civilian railway workers present at the scene told a different story. They recalled arriving under floodlights to find the area cordoned off by officers speaking Russian with a heavy German accent. Instead of investigating, the soldiers gathered the intact crates, loaded them into black trucks without markings, and drove away into the night. Those who asked questions were detained briefly, warned to forget what they saw, and released. Official records later stated that no significant materials were lost. The true contents of Operation Scythe came to light only through scraps of correspondence discovered after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Among the papers of General Pavel Sudoplatov, one of Stalin's foremost intelligence chiefs, researchers found a decrypted telegraph dated March 2, 1947, from NKVD Colonel Dmitry Koval, cargo secured, priority to Department V per Comrade Berier's order, data integration with Reich archives proceeding, directive, do not duplicate, do not translate. Attached was a list of German file codes beginning with Resche Bioti, Annenerbe Expsych, and Reichsforschung Kiel 209s. The implication was unmistakable. Operation Scythe was not about art or spoils of war, but the assimilation of captured Nazi research into the Soviet intelligence system. Cross-references found years later in Declassified CIA briefings from 1952 corroborate the existence of a Red Archive, a secret, Soviet repository of classified materials taken from German facilities between 1945 and 1947. A report titled Soviet Exploitation of Axis Scientific Intelligence described the systematic transfer of files relating to population control, propaganda psychology, and special interrogation procedures. One footnote referred cryptically to documents obtained via train transport 3K, Lvov Corridor, February 47th, codename Scythe. This single reference connects the missing train to one of the darkest intersections between Nazi and Soviet intelligence work. The files themselves were said to contain research from concentration camp laboratories, field interrogation centers, and SS medical institutes, the raw data of human endurance and behavioral manipulation. Instead of destroying these documents, Stalin's NKVD apparently viewed them as assets. Koval's internal directive, recovered by Polish historians in 1993, stated, "Enemy methods are to be repurposed for the defense of the people's state. Knowledge cannot be fascist." In 1968, a KGB colonel named Yuri Malenkov defected to West Germany. During his debriefing by the Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, he claimed to have worked on Project Kosa in the early 1950s, describing a secure archive deep within Moscow's Lubyanka complex. According to his testimony, the archive was divided into 3 vaults, one for German documents, one for Soviet evaluations, and one for application experiments. He recalled that some of the films were German, others Soviet recreations based on them. They showed people, prisoners, exposed to stress, light, and drugs. The scientists called it behavioral decomposition. When asked what became of the material, Malenkov replied, "They buried it deeper. The files were not for history. They were for use." In 1991, following the collapse of the USSR, a small group of Ukrainian archivists working in the remnants of the KGB's Lvov division discovered microfilm reels labeled Kosa 3P. Among the few frames that survived were pages typed in both Russian and German, bearing the heading Instruktion für psychologische Entwaffnung feindlicher Bevölkerung. Instructions for psychological disarmament of enemy populations. The text outlined methods for inducing compliance through food deprivation cycles, staged propaganda, and selective information, exposure through controlled radio, frequencies, handwritten notes in Russian. Margins translated the phrase controlled radio frequencies as psycho-acoustic modulation, an echo of the earlier Königstein experiments. The most disturbing of the recovered notes described an entity referred to only as Department P. Its listed staff included both Soviet and foreign specialists, ex-Reich. The director's name was redacted, but an accompanying personnel card bore the initials ET, possibly Emil Thilo, the same scientist associated with the Königstein facility. If true, this would mean the same individual's work had migrated seamlessly from Nazi Germany to Soviet custody, then into Cold War intelligence research. Throughout the 1990s, rumors of the Red Archive drew researchers and journalists to Moscow, but the files remained locked away. The Russian government denied the archive's existence until 2005, when an anonymous leak published by Novaya Gazeta included photographs of a heavily stamped dossier titled Operacja Kosa, Programa Kontrol Chelovek, Operation Scythe, Program Control Man. The photographs showed diagrams of electrodes attached to human heads, graphs measuring frequency responses, and typed annotations referencing experiment subjects, camp origin, 1943. One marginal note in German read, Fortsetzung unter sowjetischer Verwaltung 1947. Unterziehen, continuation under Soviet administration 1947. The authenticity of the photographs has never been verified, yet no one has successfully disproved them. Some historians argue that Operation Scythe laid the intellectual groundwork for Cold War propaganda techniques. The refinement of mass persuasion, ideological reconditioning, and media saturation as tools of state control. Others see in it a deeper horror, the merger of totalitarian sciences, where two enemies found common cause in the manipulation of human consciousness. The idea that Stalin's secret police preserved and evolved Nazi psychological doctrines has become a near taboo subject in Russian historiography. Requests for access to related files are routinely denied under Article 7 of the State Secrets Act, citing national security relevance. The last publicly traceable mention of Operation Scythe appeared in a 1988 internal memo of the Soviet Ministry of Internal Affairs. The document ordered the consolidation and transfer of legacy materials from Project Kosa to Central Archive No. 17, Volgograd Oblast. A handwritten addendum read, "Maintain category black classification. Do not microfilm." This was less than a year before the USSR collapsed. Since then, no government has admitted possession of those files. Today, only fragments remain, scorched papers, a handful of microfilm frames, and the testimonies of men who carried orders they did not understand. If the full archive still exists, it likely lies sealed beneath one of Russia's countless decommissioned intelligence bunkers, buried under decades of secrecy. Somewhere in that darkness are the names of scientists, Soviet and German alike, who built a new kind of weapon, not of steel or uranium, but of mind and will. Operation Scythe was not merely an intelligence collection, it was the quiet inheritance of evil, passed from one empire to another, preserved through silence. And if the files ever surface, they may reveal that the Cold War's most powerful weapon was born not from ideology, but from what both sides were willing to keep. Chapter 5. The Arctic Vault of Project Nemesis. In the heart of Greenland's ice, buried beneath nearly 100 meters of permafrost, the US Army Corps of Engineers constructed a secret installation during the height of the Cold War. Officially, it was called Camp Century, a prototype for Arctic survival and nuclear-powered research. But in a classified memorandum dated June 3, 1959, signed by Brigadier General Thomas Crandall of the US Army Polar Research and Development Center, the project carried a different code name, Nemesis. Its stated purpose was subsurface logistical feasibility for strategic deployment. What this truly meant, historians would later learn, was something far more ominous. A covert attempt to bury a Cold War arsenal beneath the ice. When Camp Century was completed in 1960, the US publicly hailed it as an engineering marvel, complete with barracks, laboratories, even a chapel. Journalists were invited to film its gleaming tunnels carved from ice. What they were not told was that deep beyond the visible structures, a restricted sector labeled Section D13An housed something not listed in any construction blueprints. According to a declassified Army engineering report obtained in 1997, Section D13 contained sealed metallic capsules, cylindrical, non-standard origin, delivered from Thule by Convoy under NATO authorization. The delivery logs list one originating address: Storage Facility A20, Linz, Austria, 1946. How materials from post-war Austria, former territory of the Third Reich, ended up beneath Greenland's ice was a question few dared ask. A classified CIA file dated March 1961, titled Subject Recovery of German War Materials, described an Operation Nemesis Delta, detailing shipments of sealed German containers, purpose unknown, possibly nuclear or metallurgical research samples. The memo included an ominous line. Contents show prolonged internal heat signatures, handling under Radiological Safety Level 3 required. These were the same canisters that would later appear in Section D13's manifest. The few who worked in Camp Century's restricted tunnels recalled strange phenomena, power fluctuations, magnetic disturbances, a low-frequency vibration that persisted even when generators were offline. One civilian contractor, Ralph Jennings, later described hearing a hum that came from the walls, like the ice itself was alive. His testimony, preserved in a 1975 oral history at the Army Corps Archive, was dismissed as stress-induced hallucination, yet 2 months after his account was recorded, Jennings died in what his death certificate described as acute radiation poisoning of unknown source. No autopsy report was ever filed. In 1963, a reactor fire struck Camp Century's portable nuclear generator. Publicly, it was portrayed as a minor incident, fuel rod malfunction, no casualties. But an internal accident report declassified in 2012 paints a darker picture. Radiation sensors in Sector D13 spiked to fatal levels, and the structural ice reportedly began to melt around the sealed containers. An emergency order issued from the Pentagon ordered immediate evacuation and abandonment of all classified materials. A team of 6 engineers was sent to reinforce the sector. None returned. Their names were omitted from official rosters, listed only under the codename Group Nemesis 54. By August 1963, Camp Sentry was sealed, its tunnels filled with ice and left to the slow drift of the glacier. When Denmark demanded explanations in 1965, the United States quietly invoked the NATO Defense Secrecy Act. The public story remained that Camp Sentry had simply been logistically impractical. Yet Danish intelligence records later revealed that their own scientists had measured elevated radiation levels near the Thule region for years afterward. In one classified correspondence dated October 1968, a Danish Ministry of Science official wrote, "We are detecting an energy pattern consistent with residual fission or an unknown active source beneath the ice." The Americans denied the claim, stating that all nuclear materials had been removed. The data told otherwise. Fast forward to 1995. Climate researchers drilling ice cores near the old Camp Sentry site hit a layer of metallic debris. Embedded within the ice was a cylinder, 30 centimeters long, bearing the faded emblem of the US Army's Polar Division, and beneath it, faint German markings, Reichsforschungsgemeinschaft. The artifact was seized immediately by US military personnel, who arrived within 48 hours. The researchers were sworn to silence under the International Research Security Act. Yet one scientist, Dr. Jens Haldorsen of Aarhus University, later confided to a colleague that the object emitted low but constant thermal radiation and contained a mechanism unlike any known Cold War technology. 2 months later, his laboratory burned to the ground. In 2016, when melting ice exposed new sections of the old base, Danish and American environmental teams were dispatched to assess contamination risks. What they found was more than abandoned tunnels. Beneath layers of collapsed snow, the team discovered reinforced steel vault doors, modern, not 1960s-era designs. They were welded shut from the inside. The project lead, Dr. Leila Sørensen, noted in her field log, "Doors show weld seams and internal stress as if subjected to extreme internal pressure or heat." Hours after transmitting that report, communication with the team ceased. Within days, the site was sealed under US military jurisdiction. Official cause: unexploded ordnance hazard. Dr. Sørensen has not been seen publicly since. Satellite data from 2019 provided the most compelling evidence yet that something still operates beneath the ice. Thermal imaging revealed a rectangular heat signature nearly 80 meters long, emanating from beneath the frozen strata near the old Camp Sentry coordinates. The pattern was steady, pulsing at intervals of 7 seconds, far too regular for a natural source. The Pentagon's response was immediate. The imagery was classified, and the European Space Agency's data servers were scrubbed of subsequent records. An internal Danish ministry memo later confirmed anomalous subsurface energy output, consistent with a low-grade reactor or active containment breach. The theory emerging among independent researchers is chilling. Project Nemesis may have been more than a cover for missile deployment. It may have been a burial, a disposal operation for something the US inherited after the war, but could neither understand nor destroy. If the German markings found on the recovered capsule were genuine, it suggests the materials were remnants of Werk Zeta, the same Peenemünde installation linked to experimental energy research. In other words, the Americans may have buried the unfinished fruits of Nazi science beneath Greenland's ice, sealed inside an Arctic tomb. But the ice does not keep secrets forever. With rising global temperatures and glacial retreat accelerating, the remnants of Camp Sentry are re-emerging. In recent years, Danish climate scientists have reported subsurface gas leaks and faint electromagnetic interference during atmospheric surveys over the region. Some claim to have heard a low, rhythmic sound emanating through the frozen ground, a mechanical pulse echoing beneath miles of silence. Locals in the nearest settlements call it Isens hjerte, the heart of the ice. Whether that heartbeat is the echo of buried machinery, or something still operating after 60 years, No one can say. Officially, Project Nemesis never existed. Camp Century was merely a relic of a bygone age of Cold War paranoia. Yet the classified records, the missing scientists, and the persistent heat beneath the ice tell another story, of a weapon sealed away rather than unleashed, waiting patiently under Greenland's eternal cold. As one anonymous memo from the 1963 Army files concluded, the vault must remain sealed indefinitely. Whatever power resides below, man was never meant to wake it.